Hello everyone, I'm Kamal Santamaria. Once the beacon of the African continent, Zimbabwe is facing its worst financial crisis in 7 years. And that is saying something, given how many financial crises it has been through. Right now, the economy is shrinking, unemployment is rising, and the country is even running out of cash, to the point where the government is struggling to pay public sector workers.
It was quite interesting in the sense that, you experienced life at a different level from a different view. In terms of, you could see probably like prices doubling overnight, prices changing whilst you're in the store, different ways that people trade. It was just a different lifestyle altogether.
Robert Mugabe, the president of Zimbabwe, was facing these problems around 2000. He needed money to bribe his enemies and reward his allies. Unfortunately, he had taxed pretty much everything there was to tax, and his policies had scared away investors. The economy wasn't doing well, and his people were unemployed and hungry. So, where to get the money? Well, one of the perks of running a country is that you get your very own money-making machine, the printing presses. So, in a pinch, you can just print more money, which is exactly what Mugabe did. The newly printed money didn't increase productivity in the Zimbabwean economy, and there was no new investment, so the economy couldn't produce more goods. In effect, you had more money chasing the same goods. More money chasing the same goods meant that the purchasing power of the Zimbabwean dollar fell. You needed more dollars to buy the same stuff as before. In other words, as the newly printed money began flooding the market, prices began to rise. Prices began to increase at a rate of about 50% a year, and that was only the beginning. As prices rose, the government had to print even more money to buy just as many goods as before. And so they did. And that is how things got out of control. The more money the government printed, and the faster prices rose. A feedback loop. By 2001, prices were rising at a rate of 100% per year. By 2002, 200% per year. 2003, 600% per year. By 2006, prices were rising at over 1,000% per year, and it cost 417 Zimbabwean dollars to buy toilet paper. No, not per roll, $417 per sheet.
People didn't have an idea of where the prices were set from, who was setting the prices, but you would have all these prices changing day in, day out. So I was telling you earlier that you could get cases whereby prices would change twice whilst you're still in the store. You get into a store, you want to buy a loaf of bread, and whilst you're still in the line to pay for that loaf of bread, you get there, then they tell you that the price has changed.
So at first, but just to get a sense of the numbers, so when you're first buying when you walked into the store, how much was the loaf of bread?
Okay, let's say... Yeah, okay. You probably walk into a store. The price of bread will probably be like $2 billion. By the time you get out, let's say to pay for it, it's probably going to be like $3 billion, maybe $4 billion. No one knows how the price would change and how it was justified for them to change the price in that way.
Inflations have occurred in other countries such as Yugoslavia in 1994, China in 1949, and Germany in 1923. As in Zimbabwe, these hyperinflations were caused by governments that were desperate for cash, but with few means to raise funds except the printing presses. The Zimbabwe hyperinflation is caused by increases in the supply of money.
Traders in central Harare are selling just about anything to make ends meet. There are stands virtually everywhere. But business is slow and competition is fierce on the streets. It's a cash-dependent economy. The problem is that there's hardly any cash around. Now, the government of Zimbabwe introduced bond notes last year, an alternative currency to try to ease that pressure. The problem is that those bond notes aren't helpful to people importing goods. We spoke to one seller who says she's struggling.
My goods, they are from South Africa, so I have to use rand So people, they are buying with bond notes. If I get the bond note, there is no way I can find the rand. I'll just have to go to the black market. There's no cash at the ATMs. There's no cash, no money. No money at all, at all. If I go to the bank, they can only give me $50. Before the bond note, things were not that hard. You know, we're crying, but not that hard. But because of these bond notes, people, they are hiding the dollar. They cannot buy with the dollar.
A new Business Monitor International report says the Zimbabwean economy has continued to shrink year on year since the 2008 inflation crisis. And that's due to overall low income and low spending. The country's unemployment rate stands at 90%. But the Zimbabwean finance minister says that agricultural production is up, and he expects the economy to grow by 3.7% this year.
Inflation measures the rate at which prices of goods and services rise in a given period. If inflation is too high, prices increase significantly and therefore reduce the purchasing power of money. In other words, the disposable income that consumers have is reduced.
In 2000, President Robert Mugabe decided to change his country's economic policy, implementing land reform. This meant that land owned by white citizens was given to black citizens who were often unskilled in farming practices. Not only did mass violence ensue, but the country turned from an agricultural exporter into an importer, gaining an unemployment rate of 94%. That's when hyperinflation set in.
They say they're waiting to die, some of them alone. They are the forgotten victims of Zimbabwe's economic crisis, and they're penniless. But the irony is that some of them had good jobs, but the money they diligently put away for retirement is gone, eaten away by the country's soaring inflation levels. They say the 1 million Zimbabwe dollars a month they get from government, less than 1 US cent, is pathetic. The effects of months with no rain and little food are starting to show. Cattle in rural Zimbabwe survive on the bare minimum. And people like Shelley Zokuwomba try to get by. She looks after her 2 grandchildren. She says this is the only meal they'll eat today. Once the vegetables are cooked, she will send the children to ask the neighbors for some bread. Charles Dambiranwa is a taxi driver. He uses his own car to drive passengers around. He makes roughly $50 US a day, enough to fill up his car and stay in business. But finding fuel wasn't always this easy. He remembers what Zimbabwe was like 5 years ago.
It was very difficult, you know. You cannot sleep at home and you sleep away. When waiting for the fuel in the queues, it was hard.
This is what he means. Back in 2006, everyone waited in line for days, sometimes weeks, to get fuel and food. Inflation was the highest in the world, and the Zimbabwe dollar was worthless. Cyril Nyamkarasa is self-employed. He used to work in a factory, but it's gone out of business. He makes a little money repairing spare parts. It's better than sitting at home.
Now we are trying to start we can start growing like a shrub, having some new leaves without drying. But we need it to grow more than that.
Some things in Zimbabwe have improved since the coalition government was formed in 2009. But talk of a possible general election next year is worrying some people here. There's a fear that the economy could once again go into a free fall.
It's a very fragile economy. CCTV's Owen Fairclough has more.
I've been waiting here for almost 5 hours. We've been giving a limited amount of up to $400.
From now on, I will keep my money at home because it's difficult at the banks and we've lost all the confidence in the banks.
The politically driven protests, but your ideas and the ideas of the people on the street, I'm sure they align.
Sorry, I didn't get that one.
Well, just asking, do you fully support the protests that we see on the street, even though they're not technically politically driven ones? Do you support everything that the people on the streets want?
Well, it is a people-driven process. It is about Zimbabweans demanding legitimately within the confines of the constitution. In terms of Section 59 of the Constitution, there is the right to demonstrate, the right to petition a government. It is part of the rights that the citizens enjoy constitutionally to raise issues that they feel are supposed to be raised to the government and for the government to listen. Now, we do not believe that force and violence is the best way and the best language for a legitimate government. Force and violence can never be a solution to issues that the citizens are legitimately raising. What are they saying? They want to be governed well. What are they saying? They want to understand where the 15 billion that has gone missing in the diamond sales has gone. They want to understand, for example, the explanation why we are having corruption in the corridors of government. We have had literally senior government officials caught with their hands in the cookie jar, literally speaking. Nothing has been done. They've caused demand to disappear. They've raided state coffers. They've literally held hostage in a parasitic fashion, in a vampire kind of fashion, you know, literally sucking the blood of the economy.
Okay.
For a long time. And the reason that has motivated citizens, the people of Zimbabwe, to protest, which is an expression of legitimate discontent, is because government has shown its complacence, inability and lack of capacity to address the fundamental issues in the country. It is Mr. Mugabe who promised 2.2 million jobs through an election campaign, which election was disputed. And this election, because it is disputed, we also dispute even the fact that ZANU-PF is a government of the people, by the people, from the people. And that is the fundamental issue that we as the opposition are articulating. Let us address fundamental issues around electoral management, around issues of a legitimate government, a government from the people, for the people. Because a government from the people would not beat up people. A government from the citizens would not be on a warpath or a confrontation with the people that it is leading.
Now, in October last year, the government presented to the World Bank and other international financial institutions a plan known as the Lima Strategy, in which it was going to pay its debt arrears of $1.8 billion in order to access other lines of credit, which are critical at this stage for supporting government's plans. Now, we're way behind on those plans, and we're hearing increasingly from those that have been very cheery about the prospects of this, increasingly desperate from the International Monetary Fund and from those international institutions, including the EU and the UK, who are increasingly concerned that this is a government that is unable to deliver in the current context.
The central bank is trying to solve the problem.
But the simple way of saying it, if you take an economy, you trash about 60 or 70% of its productive capacity, then any spending will start to generate inflation. And if you wanted to avoid hyperinflation in Zimbabwe, then you would have had to have mass deaths of the population through starvation. Private investment would have had to come to virtually a sudden halt, because you've just lost all that supply side. So whenever anyone raises at your dinner parties about Zimbabwe, it had nothing to do with demand. It was a supply issue. They trashed their supply. And I know you do in the US, you're doing a pretty good job of trashing your supply at the moment and running down the capacity of your workforce and your industrial structure. But you haven't done it yet, and the companies are still out there. There are still workers who will work for them if there's enough demand for the products. And all you need to do is get the production, your supply side working again. In Zimbabwe, they lost it. It was non-existent. About 60 to 70% was lost. That's why they had hyperinflation.